Hello, everyone. I'm sorry to break into your little conversations and disturb you, but I want to make sure that we continue going. We have I know that previous sessions we've had a lot of information, so your heads are probably really like trying to consume all this information right now, and I have to apologize that I'm going to do the same again. I'll give you a little background into one of the reasons why I'm doing this particular session, which is quite interesting. I've been speaking for many years now and trying to train and educate and pass my knowledge. But when I was sitting as a vendor for many years, that a lot of the times as a vendor, you're always doing the fear, you're always showing the risks, you're always showing the problems out there. And a while ago, when I was at a conference and I was giving all of this information, because I'm always presenting myself when I'm doing ethical hacking. So I'm always showing you how easy it is to break into people's laptops and how easy it is to steal people's information and how easy it is to do ethical hacking. So I'm always showing you how to do the kind of investigation or the assessments and so forth and show the risk. But somebody turned around and said to me one time, Joe, now I'm afraid. I don't even know how I sleep at night these days. When you do it next time, what I'd like to learn is that what do you do to protect yourself? What's the things that you do on a daily basis, day to day, that you go through that you could probably pass on to someone else, that they can actually take that same knowledge? So rather than me going and giving you a fear, that we typically do in a lot of cyber, there's threats out there and things are happening. This session is now to really help show you what I do every single day when I wake up in the morning to when I go to bed at night, what I do basically to try and keep myself protected. So hopefully this will be something that would be kind of an educational kind of purpose. So how does a hacker stay safe and secure online? So those who are actually doing the ethical hacking or those who are doing the criminal hacking, what's the activities that they do on a daily basis to make sure that they don't become the victim? And this is the purpose of this particular session. So again, my name is Joseph Carson, kind of one of the main organizers behind the event, and wanted to make sure that we bring a lot of the speakers that we have today to Tallinn to provide and share our knowledge. So the first thing is, we've always got kind of the human element of it. I always kind of like to compare this. You've got data security on one side, and then you've got human error on the other. And as I mentioned continuously, we always have the human element of things. So again, it's always about making sure that you're aware of what's out there, making sure how you can mitigate it, how you can actually reduce the risk. One of the things that was interesting previously in a session that we had with Amar, was that Amar had stated that, when you ask the question, are you secure, yes or no? Me, as an ethical hacker, I know that there's no 100% protection. I know that there's no one that has 100% security. I know at some point in time you will be compromised, and I know that I have been compromised. The question is when you get compromised, is it a simple, basically just data compromise, or is it something that will lead to a catastrophe? And that's the difference. So you want to make sure that you keep on the minimum side of the risk, make sure that you actually mitigate it and detect it early and prevent it. So one of the things, I attend a lot of conferences I mentioned earlier, and one of the questions I have every time I go to different underground hacking events, or I go to the likes of Black Hat and so forth, I do many surveys. And when you ask a hacker whether your password's safe from anybody or government, 75% of hackers believe that it's not safe. So a password should never be the only protection that you take. And many organizations today, that is the only protection. And I just released a research report that came out yesterday. I've been doing a research last year, and the report was just launched, that's into the future of passwords, that our password's dead, our password's going away. And many times it's been cited over the years, so I decided to do a bit of investigation and find that actually passwords are not dead, and they're growing at an accelerated rate. But again, many people forget that they shouldn't be the only factor of security that you take. So you have to understand that passwords will continue, they are a security control, and how you treat them, how you use them is an important part. Another area is that we surveyed hackers, and we asked them, do you support data privacy? And every 100% of hackers support data privacy, because data privacy is security. They are the same thing. One has contributions of the other. But half of them, 50% of hackers will actually, for a fee, hack you. They will take money in order to actually do, either being ethical or non-ethical, in order to steal your data. So another important area is that, yes, while they have the skill sets, they're willing to actually be paid for it. And the challenge is criminal organizations are willing to pay for it more than actually real companies and corporations. And that's a challenge. Companies do have to start really taking emphasis and actually making sure they get the right skill force and the right people working on their side and not for criminal organizations. The other side is that one of the things that I found a lot of my time doing passive assessments and reconnaissance and so forth is that 90% of my work was investigative. It was research. It was passive. Very little of that time was actually going and actually doing any type of real physical or actually doing any types of phishing scams or actually breaking devices or so forth or looking for vulnerabilities. 90% of the actual research was done on the public internet and also non-indexed data and also archived data. It was all done in public information. And the more information that we were able to gather, the more footprint or the more blueprint that you can get of that organization to make your actual activity more successful. By doing a really good recon in the early stages means that if you do this really well, within 24 to 48 hours, you already have access to your target. That's kind of the hard well and hard preparation that goes into. So if you think about 24 to 48 hours, and 90% of the time is recon, you can see how much effort goes into this. And hackers, one of the things that they have is lots and lots and lots of time. Time is on their side, not ours. So, one of the things that where we do most of the reconning is of social media. People are willing to share every piece of their data for nothing. They'll give it up, they'll put it online, their pictures, their locations, their friends, their favorite food, and so forth. Where they're going to be, who they're going to be with. And this is an era that we're living in, and this is something that you have to be really decisive into what information you put up here. One of my areas that what I recommend to everybody is when you're actually creating social media accounts or actually using social media or actually the public internet, be very careful about what you put in there. Be very careful about what personal information you upload. These sites will actually make money on getting you to put more information. You're I would say that you're the employee of these companies and they're using your information to create money and sell it. So ultimately you have to think about that they have value of your data. They actually have the need to get more information from you to make that money. So always be wary about what you're actually putting on social media. Only put the basic minimum needs that you need to get the account working and no more. I know it says that it makes it easier for you to find friends and to socialize and to get more things that you will like, but be always very careful about what you actually put up there. One area is that it's not possible to delete it because once it gets scraped, it gets archived into a site where you no longer have access to it. So hackers, one of the things that we do is that we actually make sure that what we put out there is the limited amount of information that's necessary. Okay? So always be thoughtful about what we call as personal identifiable information. The next area, this is kind of where we kind of classify those. So you should really look into understanding about recording and actually knowing your personal identifiable information. You need to know your digital footprint. You need to know what actually represents you in a digital world. And the more you understand about this information that's valuable, when we see this, we see money. And the more I can actually get from you, the more valuable this becomes. And you have to treat this the same way. One of the biggest problems that when we have data breaches is that when you look at this, you actually see your data and that's it. When anyone else looks at this from my hacking world, we see money. We see value. And if we can validate this information and verify it, then somebody online is willing to pay for it because then they actually can either do fraudulent activities for you. So when you see this information, always be cautious about actually putting it online. So be in control of your personal data. That's one of the most important areas. Make sure you're actually limited the use on public forums. Because ultimately, when they get this information, they can steal your identity. They can become you, and ultimately that's one thing you don't want to happen. So one of the areas, as I go through my day, my recommendations for you to stay safe and make sure you stay protected, is the use of public Wi-Fi. Okay? Public Wi-Fi, while it's great and while it's free and it allows you to stay connected to the world, you always have to assume that someone's watching you. You always have to assume that when you're connected, that your data is being looked at and gathered and collected by someone else. Public Wi-Fi, I know it's very common in Estonia and other places, it's growing popularity. But when you connect to public Wi-Fi, I can tell you that it's one of the areas that whatever you're actually streaming across there, most people actually don't even use a VPN. They don't use any type of encryption or any type of security on public Wi-Fi. And therefore, basically, every piece of data you have going across that wire is visible. I actually carry with me Pineapple all the time when I'm doing my penetration testing. If you're familiar with what a Pineapple is, it's the ability for me to actually replicate that Wi-Fi network, take out the Wi-Fi network, and then have all of your systems think that it's connected to it, but you're actually really connected to me. And all your data is then flowing through my system, and I can see pretty much every piece of data that you have. And that's one of the things you have to be aware of, is that when you're using public Wi-Fi, you really don't know, is it actually, was it something that's trustworthy? Always assume that it's not. And where possible in public areas, always try to use your own personal data hotspot. Always make sure that you actually use your phone data connection, have a personal hotspot. Use those in preference to actually using public Wi-Fi. And if you do have to use public Wi-Fi, definitely make sure that you want to know, is it the right public Wi-Fi? Is it secured? And also, when you're using it, make sure you limit what type of data you access. Don't do financial data. Do not change passwords. Be careful with auto password refills and populations and so forth. Always be careful what you're putting in when using public Wi-Fi. I'm pretty sure that many of you connected to the public Wi-Fi today and have been using it throughout the day, whether doing your Twitter updates and connecting and doing work. But you have to assume that everything you did today has been recorded. I can admit that I didn't do anything. I didn't have time today. But typically when I do these, I actually record and show people back. One of the things I typically show is the advertisements that people access in the web pages, because with advertisements, the interesting with advertisements is pretty much tells me what cookies you have stored in your system. So I know by looking at the advertisements what websites you've been visiting before, what Amazon searches or Google searches have been done, because the images I can see then is customized to you. So advertisements are always a really good way to see what you've been surfing, and sometimes very embarrassing to some of the ones that pop up. So Wi-Fi is something to always be aware of, and always assume that you're being watched if you're using public. The other thing that's been mentioned a few times today is that in ethical hackers, one thing that they're really good at is staying up to date and patches. One of the things that many people don't do that well is they keep applications updated. Another area as well is not just keeping applications updated, keeping the browsers updated, using the latest, making sure you got your Java patch, your Flash patch, your IE and so forth. Another area is actually using legal software. One of the biggest areas, if you look at where most of the botnets and most of the criminal activities come from, it's actually goes where actually illegal software is at its highest. If you're looking and using illegal software, you're guaranteed that your system will be compromised and already included some type of malware or some type of rat or bot tool. So make sure, one of the things that, and something that we see across the industry, we're doing research, we see where illegal software, we see it's the highest level of botnets and activities from attacks. So therefore, I definitely recommend do not use illegal software, because you can no guarantee that it's actually going to be infected. Use the legal software, and make sure that you stay patched. This is important. Go through every single week, all my systems that I have, virtual machines, systems, I make sure that they're running the latest versions and update and patched. This is something that I do myself to make sure that I know that I'm not exposed to the most common criminals out there. I know that, of course, you can do so much to prevent against nation states or kind of more targeted attacks, but at least you're keeping yourself safe from the majority of the threats. So updates is one of the most important areas for both companies and your personal side. One of the things as well that I highly recommend is identities. I know in the physical world, we all have one identity, in most cases. Some people have, some kind of, challenges with that, but in most cases, we all have one identity in the physical world. But online, I have 29, probably 30 different identities that I have online. And the reason why I've created many different identities is, of course, when I'm doing some activities, I want to make sure that it doesn't get traced back to me. So I have some type of anonymity when I'm actually doing different types of passive assessments or attacks. I also have different identities that are used for de-risking, as we're referred to it, as classification and de-risking. What I recommend to yourselves, you should at least have probably 2 or 3 digital identities. Okay, and the reason for it is that, and digital identities can be in the simple form of just an email address and a name. Of course, my name is related to all the email addresses, most of them. I do use various variations for others. But I have one email account that's used for communication. I have another email account that's actually used for subscriptions. I have another email account that's used for actually checking into public and hotels and so forth. Some places they ask you before you can check in or before you can subscribe, before you can go into the hotel access, what email address. De-risk your data by making sure you do not use the same email address across the entire place that asks you to enter it. Create multiple and de-risk it. So therefore, I can tell you now with all my different accounts, I know which accounts or which places I've logged into or actually accessed that have been compromised, because I know that when I'm getting different phishing emails, I can actually decipher from which email address it came into where it came from. If you're only using one and everything goes in the one bucket and that one email, email account gets compromised, you are literally a reset. So everything would be accessed. So de-risk your identities and de-risk your email accounts. Also having one for reset passwords only. So when reset passwords goes into one email account and not my communication one. So something I recommend to get in practice, make sure that when you're going in across different areas that you try to limit your email disclosure and which ones you use for subscribing and so forth. And have multiple different identities online. They can be the same name. What you're doing is it's the different information that you're making available in there and the different security elements that you're actually creating as well. The other area that I highly recommend, of course, is that I had the fortunate time a few years ago that I sat with a cryptographer right next to me for a year and got to learn pretty much everything about passwords, complexity, password, strength, and so forth. And as I mentioned earlier, I did a big research last year into passwords themselves. And one of the things is that, of course, everyone in this room is using a password. I'm pretty sure that they're not going away. They're going to be continued for the future. You need to understand what creates a strong password. And we've had many different inconsistencies over the year. That, for example, when you're having long passwords, complexity, uppercase, lowercase, non-ASCII characters, changes every 30 days, and we just get into this really big security fatigue. Even myself, I have 29 different identities, and I've got over 400 now online accounts for different services. There's no way I can remember all of them. There's no way that I can go through. I've created a system which allows me to manage my passwords effectively. I know what creates a complex password. I know what creates a strong password, but I don't have to change them frequently. I change them pretty much once a year. The reason why I change my password once a year is because any type of brute force attack, a good password takes a year to crack it. It takes 1 year to brute force a decent, well-created password. So knowing that it takes that amount of time, then I know that I just need to change it before a year. And therefore, I know that if it's ever been compromised, that they're never going to get it. So the way that I've actually declassified or actually created my passwords is that what creates a good password is that something that's basically 8 characters or more, if you understand how hashing works. So therefore, if it's 8 characters, you, with not knowing who you're actually, the providers, what type of security or encryption you're using or hashing you're using, you can guarantee that by using more, it's going to use the full hash. And you're not going to end up with zeros at the end unless they're using salt. And then something that's actually a passphrase. Don't get into complexity. Complexity means that you only need to add one non-ASCII character. One non-ASCII character in the password changes the difference between 25 minutes to brute force it to 1 year. Just one. So when you create a passphrase, you only need one non-ASCII character or special character to make that complexity quite strong. You don't need to change them that often. What you end up doing is you end up creating a system. So what I typically use is I use password managers. So just to give you an idea, this is one type of password manager that I use for personal use. and I've actually de-risked my passwords as well. Okay, so because I de-risk my email accounts, I also de-risk my passwords. And what I mean by de-risking is by using a password manager, one thing it allows me to create, now you've seen my subscription email, I don't really care about it. I've created different vaults for my passwords are stored, okay? So I've got some unique passwords which are easy for me to remember. Those are the ones with the human interaction that I use on a daily basis, the ones I need to use frequently. But what I've created is 3 vaults, okay? And the 3 vaults basically determines how they synchronize, how they actually synchronize across my different devices, because I have many, many devices, many laptops, so I have many of them, so I need to have them synchronized. So I have one which is cloud. So anything that I have subscribed to on the public internet where I access, I've got a cloud vault, which is called cloud. It's not stored in the cloud, but it gets synced through the cloud. Then I have a sensitivity one. This is where I want to have my email accounts that I use. Okay, so things like private accounts which has personal identifiable information behind them. And then I have basically a secure vault, okay? This is for things for accessing my lab, home systems, my Wi-Fi networks, anything that basically I don't want to have synced anywhere, okay? So the way that I've separated those is basically through a classification system. So I've classified my passwords in regards to sensitivity. So then what I've basically got is, where possible, I auto-generate the password complexity through the vault. So I never need to know the password, ever. I just need to know how to access each of those vaults. Then for synchronization, this one goes up into OneDrive and then synchronizes across all my devices. I don't mind syncing the cloud vault because it's only cloud accounts. It's only the accounts that basically already cloud access, so I'm not too, and it's non-sensitive data in there, so I'm not too worried about it. This one only syncs between devices. Direct connection. It never goes up into the cloud. It stays on the systems where the vault's stored. So it never goes into the public realm, never goes into a public area. This one only syncs basically when I get into my home. So by actually making a system and making a classification and knowing basically how to manage them, and the only way I can do this is by using a password manager, is that it allows me to really manage all of the accounts that I have, the complexities, the locations, and so forth. And simply, basically, you can see that here I've got multiple vaults. I can go and create a new login, or not a secure note, but a new login. I can create a password, and my passwords are typically that complex, and I never need to remember them. And what happens is I also have a security audit as well. So the security audit helps me remember which passwords are going to hit that 1-year period to tell me when I need to change it. It also allows me to see which vendors that you're using, when they have a breach. It also allows me to see this vendor's had a breach, now you need to change the password for that. This hugely simplifies my life. It means I only have a few passwords, typically 5 or so, to remember in my head, and then everything else is automatic generated, complex. And then through my, synchronization system, make sure that I can access them when I need to, where I need them. So this is one of the systems that I've kind of leveraged in regards to the password side of things. So I use one password typically for my personal use, and then I also use a company that I work with, Thycotic, which is for enterprise passwords, so for basically more auditing and SIEM and more integration with Active Directory and so forth. But it really is a system that allows me to do my work easier without actually getting into password fatigue and password compromising. Okay? Any questions about this? Okay, we'll move. Okay. So passwords are significantly important, and you need to manage them. You will have more. On average, today it's around 30 passwords per person, roughly, and it's growing significantly. So one of the reasons why it's growing significantly is the cause of social logins. So one of the things I recommend where possible is not to use social logins. While social logins are great and they make your life much easier, they are a serious security risk. Serious, like big time. When you go in and, for example, I went to a hotel in New York last week, and the hotel said, right, enter in, you want to access the hotel Wi-Fi, you have to click on one of the social logins. What that will do is it will actually create an application password in the background and allow the hotel to access, if you use Facebook, for example, it will allow the hotel to access your Facebook profile continuously until you go and revoke it. So we always questioning why when you're back in a city and all of a sudden the hotel you stayed in 2 years ago is now advertising to you, is because they've access to your profile and they're able to see that and they can able to advertise to you when you're in that location. So one of the things is that, yes, while this is a ease of use, and if you do want, I have a secondary digital identity, which I can use for that. So I do have my second identity, which is a Facebook account, which allows me, that has nothing behind it, that allows me to do the single sign-ons. But in most cases, I do create a unique account. Something that is always good practice. The other area is encryption, more encryption, and more encryption, where you can possibly use it, and understand about where the encryption starts and where it ends. Making sure that all your hard drives are encrypted, your laptop's encrypted, when you're accessing any services online. One of the things you always have to be careful with, and this one thing that's really good about the password managers, they help to tell you what sites that you're accessing that are actually, they're sharing the password in clear text with. So it's another really good advantage of password managers that gives you that visibility. So, but it's really important to use encryption where possible. One of the things I use, if I was to connect to the public Wi-Fi if I needed to, I will use a VPN. I've got a VPN, I've got a home VPN that I connect to when I need to access my home environment, so I can access directly. Or I have a VPN that I use basically to create anonymity or create privacy across countries, and also to make sure that I can watch Estonian TV when I'm traveling. So the other area as well is back up your critical data. I also have a backup method as well. So with the backup method is that one is that you definitely need to have one is an online backup and an offline backup. So similar to the way my password vault is set up, what I end up having is I've got the same system with backups. So I have basically, I have a backup that happens locally in the system, and then this system itself, what I'll do is when I get to my home network, this will actually back up to a NAS device on my home, okay? And then this NAS device is backed up to another one. And what I end up doing was every 6 months, I rotate this. I switch it out with another one and switch it back. So it means that I have an offline copy that's 6 months old. So I make sure that even if I did get infected and it went into here, that I know that I've got a clean copy that's actually 6 months, at least, which is satisfactory for me if I get data loss or I get infected or have a failure. This is something that I've calculated that's a satisfying time frame for me to get data that I need to get back. But it allows me to make sure I've got an offline backup, I've got an online backup, and then I've got a redundancy as well. So it's a way, it's important to have backups. As I mentioned earlier today, one of the biggest areas, and it's whether it being disaster, whether it being hard drive failure, or whether it being ransomware, the importance of backup is the key. It's so critical to make sure you have access to that information again. So it's just a system that I've kind of portrayed that works for me, that allows me to make sure that if I'm ever compromised. And I've also, again, with the different types of encryption, classified the data which has different strengths. Least privilege model, I talked about it earlier. Least privilege model is something that I use on a kind of frequent basis. So my home machines that I use when I'm surfing the internet and just doing my day stuff or research is always a least privilege model, which means that I use a standard account. It's a least privilege standard account. And when basically, what's annoying, of course, is that every time you need to elevate an application or you need to elevate or install or do some changes, you do get prompted for the UAC prompt. But the purpose of this is the reason why you're doing least privilege is when you're surfing online, if you're actually under the administrator context, anything you click will be executed under the user's context. So therefore, that application, ransomware, malware will run under administrator rights and then infect the system or actually cause problems or whatever it may do. By going least privilege, that gives you the visibility that when you're doing those things, it shows you that this activity is actually looking for higher privileges. almost all of the ransomware cases would be mitigated by doing that model. There's a few that is actually, of course, running in the browser that has direct access to the hard disk, but in most cases, most of the ransomware would be actually mitigated by going in least privilege model and elevating when you need to. So only when I need to install an application or need to make a change or need to do some administrator on my systems, only then is when I elevate and use a system administrator or administrator account to do the activities. So least privilege model is something that everyone should get in the practice of doing in personal life and of course companies as well. And multi-factor authentication for everything. Everything. Now, of course, I've got a fingerprint here, but when I mean multi-factor authentication, I also have de-risked my multi-factor authentication as well. I know I go to the extremes. I use, of course, Google Authenticator for the cloud apps, and then I use Microsoft Authenticator for my more sensitive ones, and then I've got another VIP that I use for offline, which is Radius. So by going through that method, the purpose is that where you possibly can, always use multi-factor authentication. It always makes sure that you have the ability to do a challenge response. I highly recommend not to use the SMS ones, but of course not every system has Authenticator apps compatibility. So you do have to revert to some for SMS. SMS is better than not having anything at all, but definitely prefer to go to the Authenticator apps. They do give a more level of protection over SMS. The reason why is SMS, there's a lot of forwarding services right now out there, so I can go online and say, okay, this telephone number that I know, I also want you to forward the SMS messages to here as well. And that's totally not protected, and you can get it as a service for like 10 euros. So therefore, any multi-factor authentication, even SMSs, will go to my other phone. So that's something you need to be aware of, and that's why you want to go with a more Authenticator app, okay? So multi-factor authentication is something that I highly recommend that every user for everything. So that it definitely makes sure that the reason for multi-factor authentication is to challenge the person continuously to make sure they are who they say they are. It's a challenge, it's a level of trust, as I refer to it, that elevates that up. And it's something that we use frequently across the board. And also security information management. I have a SIEM running at home that's basically capturing all of my log files. You don't need to go to that extreme where you're running a SIEM. But what you can do is I highly recommend that you create what I refer to as things like Google Alerts. Who's familiar with Google Alerts? Okay, so what I typically use Google Alerts for is I have Google dorking commands that I've done that specifically for me that shows me in both public and non-public domain that allows me to set those alerts so that on a daily basis I get feeds into when my name is ever used on the internet, when my details or email address is ever found. So it's consistently searching for any types of activities to make sure that I have visibility, whether somebody tweets. I do a lot of journalist work, I do a lot of publications and speaking, so sometimes my name pops up on a website and I want to see immediately when that happens. So I get feeds immediately when I see my name being used, my date of birth, address, kids' names and so forth. That all gets fed back into me and I get to see when it's happening in the public and non-public domain. It's something that you should do. It's what hackers do when we're doing a recon. You should do it to actually recon yourself, to get visibility of what your footprint is online. So it's something that I recommend. It's always good practice to keep this going. And the other things that we do, basically just from communication-wise, of course we use things like Tor and ITP to stay somewhat kind of hidden. As you can see, I've got here, one thing to be aware of and be careful is when you're using Tor is that be careful about what changes you make. By resizing the window size or making changes, all of those changes and resolutions and things that you do can then be traced back to you. I can tell you that most of the people, 50% of the people on Darknet today is law enforcement and security researchers. All doing investigations into the other 50% who are basically either doing drugs or legal activities or just looking to basically communicate with friends anonymously. Even pharmaceutical companies are using Tor so that they can actually communicate IP so that they know that their IP intellectual property is not being stolen by other countries or nation states. So just to be aware. So, but yeah, resizing and changing the window and different items will actually make you more detectable. And never use Tor just by itself, use it with a VPN as well, and actually do multiple VPN hops. Other types of things, of course, using encryption, file encryption, or hard disk encryption. Most of the communication we use across the board is using IRC chat or Jabber. And then all the currencies that we do between each other are going through Bitcoins. This is basically the process that we go through to make sure that online, on all the activities we do that we don't want to be visible, that remain hidden. And I highly recommend that you should do the same, because this is how you stay secure and safe, by doing the same things that hackers are actually doing in order to actually look for their targets and so forth. So these are just some of the practices I do day to day. I have my email alerts coming in the morning. I check my account activities on the ones that's the most sensitive to see about where my logins are coming from, what's been done. I make sure then I check about the password manager to see what passwords are due to expire, make sure that they're updated, refresh the factor authentication, use the digital identities where possible, where you need to make sure you keep a lower footprint, and of course maintaining cyber hygiene, cleaning it up as you go along. One of the areas that I recommend that you do is that when you're no longer using an account, disable it, delete the data, get rid of it. When you're actually connected to the hotel Wi-Fi today, before you leave, go to your phone, forget the network. The reason why is if you leave it in your phone, mostly iPhones are always looking. They're like, I need Wi-Fi, I need Wi-Fi. Where is it? And they're always looking for the Wi-Fis you previously connected to. And an iPhone will just, if you're connected to Wi-Fi free, the next time it finds Wi-Fi free, irrespective of the MAC address, it's going to connect to it. So always be aware that when you finish using the network, forget it, get rid of it, and therefore also clean up your devices automatically connect. Never have automatically connect, which is a pain, because every time I'm driving, I look at my phone, it goes, hey, here's hundreds of Wi-Fi networks to want to connect to. But I'd rather live with that pain than connecting to things that I don't know that I'm connecting to. So clean up your Wi-Fi connections, set it to not automatically connect as well. So just go through making sure you clean up your footprint where possible. And if you find alerts that you do online, you can then make sure that if you see those and detect them, go through the process of deleting them as well. So these are just some of the things that I do every single day to make sure that the activities that I do are safer. It does cause some challenges, when somebody says, I thought you were checked into the hotel. I am. No, you're not. I can't find your email address. I know. I can't find your name. I know. It's like, what name is it under? And then you have to give the right name and so forth. It does cause some challenge in regards to financing and auditing and other types of things. But at the same time, it means your footprint is less of visibility. So always leave a positive footprint, whether you're actually doing ethical hacking or criminal activities as well. So that's kind of, whatever activity you're doing, make sure you leave a positive footprint. At that point, I'll open up if anyone has any questions in the room related to some of the ways that I protect myself. Any questions? Are you going to do the same process? Are you going to start? You don't have to go to the extremes. I do consider myself at a bit of an extreme level, but I do recommend to have at least one extra identity email account. I do recommend use a password manager, multi-factor authentication. All of those you can enable. You don't have to do the whole entire process, but at least start to do some of it, because it will definitely make you safer, and it will make you a much more difficult target and a difficult victim as well to get access to. So the point of view, no other questions. Hopefully it's been valuable. If you do have other questions you want to do one-on-one, feel free to use the break time. Otherwise, I hope you're enjoying the conference. Enjoy the rest of the sessions, and look forward to seeing you in the larger room later for the panel.